Hey everyone. Well, this is the fun one. This is about the future of cooking, what this kitchen will look like 10 years, 20 years down the road. And man, walking around CES, have you guys seen some pretty crazy, cool cooking gadgets? Some cool cooking robots? It feels like there's a lot of them this year. And I have no doubt that in like 10 years, 20 years, AI, automation robotics, all these cool new technologies you were talking about will have some sort of impact in the kitchen. I think also personalization and all those things that will make things more tailored, food more tailored around our personal preferences, that'll have a big part to play. But to get there, we still have to consider that food is going to be all about, all these technologies have to be in service of making a great experience for the consumer. Because if it's not, it's just technology for technology's sake. So I think you guys, we're gonna have a great conversation today talking about all that and what this future of cooking in the kitchen looks like. But before we do that, why don't we get to know our panelists a little bit? And I'm gonna start off with Robin right next to me, the CEO of Suvie. Robin, tell us a little bit about Suvie and what you're building.
Well, thank you, Mike, for having me here and for doing all this great leadership with food tech content at CES. So Suvie is the kitchen robot in the home today, serving thousands, tens of thousands of people dinner and lunch and breakfast every day. It's a refrigerated multi-zone oven that goes from cooling to cooking with a frozen meal subscription and automates huge parts of the dinner preparation and cooking experience to save consumers time and money.
Awesome. And next to you, we have Sam D'Amico with Impulse Labs. And you guys had some pretty big news, I think, in the past couple of days. Tell us about what you're doing.
Yeah, we made the poor decision to announce at CES with all these other great products out there. And also thanks so much for hosting today. Really appreciate it. We build next generation home appliances that kind of pave the way for a clean energy future. And we're starting with the highest performance stove ever. The idea is basically if you embed a lithium iron phosphate battery pack in every major home appliance, you can deploy massive amounts of energy storage on the grid and make better appliances as well. So we've got basically the highest performance stove. It's actually downstairs and you can check it out in Amazon space as well. So we're really excited to be sharing that with everyone.
Yeah, and I do want to talk a little bit about electrification of the kitchen because that's a big macro trend that you're tying into with a pretty novel approach, I think. Next to you, we have Lauren Cason. Lauren, you've done some really cool work in augmented reality and virtual reality, working with big companies like Apple, but you've also done some crazy cool stuff, just hacking away at layering on augmented reality with regards to cooking. Tell us about what you're doing.
Yeah, so I'm a prototyper. Some of the clients have been places like Google and IKEA, Snapchat, and I talk about what headset use is going to look like in 5 to 10 years and made a prototype about headsets in the kitchen that you may have seen somewhere on the internet.
And last but not least, we have Jonathan Blutinger, who has been doing some really cool work with alternative protein companies and also some great graduate work around things like cooking with lasers and 3D food printing. Jonathan, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us all here, Mike. Yeah, my name is Jonathan. I kind of straddle the line between academia and industry right now. For a long time, I did my PhD and postdoc at Columbia working on digital cooking technologies around 3D printing food, cooking with lasers, and just kind of creating a digital cooking platform that will some way be in your home at some point that can assemble and cook food for you. And then right now, I'm also kind of working with Redefine Meat, who's one of my clients, and working on a special project which is involving texture analysis research. And they're a 3D printing company that 3D prints steak out of plants. So that's kind of where I come in.
Well, great. I just referenced when I walked up here, it seems like there's a lot of next generation cooking boxes here at CES this year. Some cool, I think, mashups, if you will, of different forms of heating. Jonathan, you've done some kind of research on laser cooking. Robin, you have this crazy cooking box of Suvie that combines different forms of heating. You have refrigeration built in. What is that? What are some of the cool next generation cooking boxes we could see, either countertop or built in, that we might envision here in 5 to 10 years?
You know, when we look at cooking automation, cooking robotics, we look at inputs and outputs, right? The inputs are, at one phase, the food you put in it. But then in the second phase, it's the data you can take out of that food, right? From measuring that food, whether it's the temperature, the doneness. Some great technologies that are already in the marketplace are, vision-based sensing. or probes, or all kinds of different ways, right? And then on the output side, you have this huge menu of cooking methods, right? Whether they're radiant heat or convective heat or sous vide heat or all these different methods. And it's about combining those inputs and those outputs to automate outcomes, right? So I think an area that has always gotten under appreciated by the consumer is frozen food, because we associate it with this very basic cooking method of microwaving, right? So I think that as we see a lot of technology develop with everybody's technology here, we're gonna get the benefits of frozen food, which is growing at an incredible pace, cooking in some very interesting automated ways, and in 10, 20 years, you'll start to see those outputs combined with really good sensing inputs of automation. And that's what we're working on today, and I think many others are.
Cool. Jonathan, cooking with lasers, it seems like something that Dr. Evil would want to do, cooking with lasers. And but you did some graduate work on that. Is that something that's realistic in 10 years? I mean, if that isn't, what other types of heating do you think we'll see in new cooking appliances?
Yeah, and actually, Austin Powers was the inspiration behind that, so I'm glad you brought that up. Except we're not using sharks in this case. Yeah, so I think lasers. The initial intent with looking at lasers was it's a really precise way to heat anything in general. And when you're looking at especially 3D printing food, you have control on a millimeter resolution, which is something that we're not really used to in the kitchen because we're cooking with our hands, more bulk heating items. So that was kind of the initial intent. But once we started exploring lasers, we realized, okay, we can actually cook with different types of modalities. So we can just change the wavelength of the laser, we can change the power, we can control the scanning speed. There's so many variables you can tune, so at some point you need to constrain yourself. But I think what makes it interesting is this also has a very small form factor. So you can integrate it with other different types of heating methods, like inductive or more bulk heating like sous vide or other ways. So I think where cooking appliances are going is kind of a more aggregate kind of approach by combining a lot of different types of heating methodologies, because then you can have a one-stop shop for like a cooking box kind of thing.
That's a great point. The fusion of additive manufacturing, 3D printing of food, lasers makes a lot of sense. I think Savory out of Israel might actually be doing some, I don't know if it's laser based, but they're doing some very concentrated heating to cook as they print their food. So they might have a burger that's being cooked as it's printed. So I think that's really interesting. We have seen solid state cooking experimented with, so that can do some pretty finite precision cooking. But Sam, you're thinking a lot about the future of cooking appliances. I mean, I think what you're building with Impulse is really cool. What are you thinking about when your next generation of products? Do you have some rough guidelines of maybe some heating technologies you might be excited about?
Yeah, so I mean, it's actually funny is like my background, one of my first internships, it was like right after high school, I worked at Raytheon on gallium nitride wafers. So it was actually funny as Raytheon invented and commercialized the microwave oven back in 50 years ago. And so there's actually not been a lot of innovations in new, like widely commercialized heating technologies. And so what we realized, like in literally 50 years, like since induction stoves and microwaves were first commercialized, what we realized was control systems and actually solving for temperature is for precise temperature is just something that has not been robustly solved for things that aren't enclosed like an oven. And so there's lots of products on the market now that actually are great, like smart thermometers, various other things like that. But like solving it generically for any pan you put on a stove is incredibly challenging. We're really excited to be announcing this week that we have a product that can do this. And so that's kind of the first entry point in what I would call an automation revolution for the kitchen in some sense, because if you actually, like, as mentioned earlier, like if you can actually know and adjust the exact temperature of your pan, like you're able to really, then you can actually start adding additional automations on top of that. You're able to actually like script recipes and do other things like that. And so we're really excited about that as kind of the first step that will then unlock many other capabilities beyond just like say, hey, cool, there's a temperature sensor. It's more like turning cooking into like with a stove into baking, where you get that same experience as maybe you get with some of these combi oven products and other things like that, but more generically actually as well.
One of the other big considerations in cooking, I think you see a little bit of that showing up at CES now, is just, hey, how do we teach people to be better cooks through the conveyance of information using guidance, etc. I've always been excited about this idea of augmented reality as a way to give superpowers to people, either in a professional kitchen environment or in the consumer kitchen environment. Lauren, I mean, as you think about augmented reality as a way to have people be guided through the cooking experience, where do you see that going, either in the consumer kitchen or the professional kitchen?
Yeah, so the prototype I made was about a consumer kitchen. It was in my house and explaining how that worked to my dad. But I think that the places that that's going to be really, really interesting are commercial kitchens, manufacturing, and accessibility. So say you have a limited field of view, being able to bring information about what's hot next to you into that field of view. Or being able to see more information about what's happening during quality control and being able to recall that really quickly because there's video of it.
That's great. One of the other categories, Robin, I'm just going to throw this at you because by the way, if you don't know, it's Robin, founder of Review.com, and she founded her own appliance company. So she's been thinking a lot about appliances for, I think, most of your professional life at this point. This is not an error you're making a product. I want to get your opinion. I've always been kind of disappointed in the progress around advancement of the refrigerator. I feel like there's been very little innovation in that, but I think there's an opportunity to rethink it. I mean, it's still this giant cold box where we lose stuff and food goes out of, basically goes bad. So how do you think maybe a product like the fridge could be rethought, and what can we see that being reimagined in 10 years? What will that look like?
Well, the first way is a refrigerator that cooks food, which is what Suvie does. But no, the second way for sure, I think, is about both interesting refrigeration technology, right? I mean, refrigeration and frankly, all appliances are about safety first, and it's not a secondary thought for all of us, right? Anytime we see these like kitchen robots that are like, throwing around knives and stuff.
That's a great impression of a kitchen robot.
The person who has to pass UL probably looks at that thing and gets a little worried, right? And so with refrigeration, it's obviously about holding food at really cold, stable temperatures that are safe to eat. And so, I mean, that was the challenge that took Suvie 4 years to get on the marketplace. But there's a lot of interesting solid state refrigeration. There's a lot of, thermoelectrics, which have never really gotten cold enough. There's a lot of opportunities there. I think there's also really interesting opportunities around refrigeration and transportation, right? I mean, the world is powered by this cold chain that if you don't work in food delivery or, frozen food, you probably have no idea about how efficient and good the U.S. cold chain is. But in other countries, especially emerging markets, there's just not as strong of a cold chain, right? And so taking refrigeration and putting it into different form factors, portable refrigeration, all those things are huge opportunities. As for the refrigerator in the home, I think, I agree. There's just not been as much innovation. And maybe it's because people, they've tried the fridge with vision, they've tried all these things, and all people want is a really reliable, trusty fridge, and the consumer maybe just hasn't responded to those innovations. I don't know, though.
No, that's great. Sam, I want to ask you a little bit about electrification, right? So I think if you think about the kitchen and all the surfaces in it, if they become inductive, you can do interesting things like put your countertop cooking appliance on your kitchen table, and all of a sudden it's connected to electricity cooking. Or you may be able to actually cook on your kitchen table. I think it's amazing what you can imagine to do when things become electrified. You're building an innovative electrified cooking appliance that has a giant battery in it, which opens up new possibilities. Where do you see this going in terms of like electrifying the kitchen and maybe what you could do with all the different services?
So I do want to comment on the fridge thing, which is actually there's been huge innovation in the fridge. Your fridge is dramatically more efficient than like fridges from the 80s. Like it's like we're talking like I think it's like 4 or 5x more efficient at this point. So there's been a huge innovation in efficiency and even like how the motors and compressors and stuff work. So there's been a ton of innovation there behind the scenes. And it's all about electrification in a sense. So what I see is basically there's going to be, I think gas stoves are over at this point. I'll just say that right now. The way that this is going to happen is not by some culture war thing and someone saying like, hey, your gas stove sucks and you should get rid of it and you should feel bad about having it and it's going to give your kids asthma and all this other stuff. Like those may all be valid complaints, but the way that it's going to be over is literally induction plus like new control systems are going to basically mean that like this is just better and QED it's over. Now, the second thing is how do you actually get rid of a gas stove? How do you actually install it? And so what we've like an induction stove today, if you buy like a stovetop or a range, requires about the same connection as an EV charger. And so in a lot of homes, especially where us coastal elites live, you may only have a 100 amp panel and you may need 40 to 60 amps to install a stove. So you end up in the situation where it's like you're remodeling your kitchen, you ask your GC, hey, I want to get one of these induction stoves, and they're like, that's hard mode and you're gonna have to wait 18 months for like Pacific Gas and Electric or whoever your utility is to like come and go attach new wires to your house that are thicker just to support that. Literally one of my neighbors has been waiting a year on my street in San Francisco. And so what we realized was if you embed a LFP battery, and for reference, this is like a relatively large battery, but it's about the size of like, about that big. That and it's 3 kilowatt hours. So it's kind of similar to these like portable power stations and stuff like that, but it fits in the stove, doesn't really make the stove dramatically bigger. If you do that, people, even when you're cooking all the time, when you're using the thing all the time, you're not drawing the peak power of the stove all the time. So by kind of exploiting that mismatch between peak power and average power, we can install a even higher performance stove than you would normally be able to get. And the requirement's like a 120 volt outlet at minimum. And so that's what's really exciting about this. And then what we also see is we're also putting batteries in people's homes, and there's a whole movement around electrification that's happening today, which is like really, really, really exciting. But if we can put batteries on the grid at scale, and it may be easier to install new stoves in people's houses because there's already a slot for that. And then we're thinking about other appliances as well, like water heaters, dryers, et cetera. You install a couple appliances, you basically can backdoor a equivalent of a Tesla Powerwall into people's houses just through the stove installs effectively. And so that's what's getting us really excited, is also building this global network of batteries after we convince people that this is the best stove to buy on the market.
I want to make a comment on that refrigerator.
Real quickly, you're Trojan horsing batteries into the house through the oven and basically becoming like the power network.
Exactly. You build super high-end appliances and you backdoor batteries.
I think one of the reasons yes, refrigerators are much more efficient, but one of the reasons we haven't seen this like proliferation of adoption of Wi-Fi and camera connectivity and precision temp sensing, right? How many people 5 years ago came out with smart ovens with perfect temperature precision and are bankrupt now? Is frankly because it's just not a huge consumer benefit, right? I mean, when we founded Suvie and we said, look, the average American parent who's making dinner and spending 45 minutes in the kitchen, they're not stressing out about the perfect temperature of that chicken breast. They're stressing out about all the prep time. They're stressing out about loading the oven. Now, in our case, we automated that by going from refrigeration to cooking automatically. And I think one of the problems is there's this almost like gadget engineering first attitude about a lot of these innovations rather than a consumer experience, consumer like pain, solving consumer pain. And so when we talk to our customers, when we talk to people responsible for putting dinner on the table, they don't talk about the amount of power. They don't talk about, the perfect degree. They talk about wanting to take 30 minutes every night that is boring kitchen prep time and spend it with their loved ones. And so the problem, I think, with these robots is this tech first versus consumer problem solving first, and that's why we haven't seen those innovations.
Yeah, we always have to keep it the core consideration. Like, what is the ultimate motivation of the consumer, the eater in the home? It's good food, making your body well, et cetera, saving time. And so even as we embrace these new technologies, we have to keep that in mind. So that's a great point. I want to ask about interfaces. I mean, I think 10 years ago, remember like everyone was like, hey, Alexa's going to like control everything. We've kind of realized that's not going to be the case. And in the intervening 10 years, I've seen like augmented kind of projection interfaces by like Bosch and Whirlpool that would allow you to kind of control it. I think IKEA's done some experimentation where they would project an interface on your kitchen table. Lauren, what does the future of like the cooking interfaces look like, do you think? Do you have some ideas of like maybe where this is going? Will it be voice? Will it be eye control where you look at something, you can kind of control something with your eyes? Will it be, projected interfaces onto different surfaces in the kitchen?
You've probably seen some of this stuff here at CES, and I guess anybody who's interested, I'd say like build it and then see what that feels like, because I did that and it felt pretty bad, honestly. Like having a bunch of stuff over your stove in an area where you're supposed to be cooking and like obscuring things that could be hot or obscuring things you should be looking at. Like it looks really, really cool on a video, and it felt awful. But I think that there's probably a bridge there with things like voice control, with being able to speak. That like much lighter touch interface, I think at least in the home kitchen is where that's going to be interesting. I think there's going to be applications, again, in places like a commercial kitchen, if you want to be able to see your ticket for the food that you're supposed to make. And being really, really careful about where that happens. You're seeing some of this happen right now in labs, in medical situations with people who are doing lab testing. People are doing some interesting stuff with HoloLenses, and how that's happening is cool. But and I think there's still a lot of work to do in terms of how that's going to happen in a home kitchen.
Real quick, part of it's about accessibility, right? I mean, one of the things we have to think about globally is an aging population. Letting people live in place longer means helping them to cook longer and giving them new ways to control things when their bodies may be starting to fail them, they're not as strong, I think is a big consideration. So that's something, Sam, you had something to say as well.
Yeah, so I think that actually is a really good point, is like the ADA requirements and making sure you make a product that's accessible for not just people with like mobility issues, but also people with vision issues and stuff like that. Like it's actually super, super important. It's funny, is my previous job before this was designing VR controllers. And so I've actually done the XR like user interface situation. And it's really funny, is like, I'll tell you what the future is, and it's knobs. But also there's actually but the other piece of this is there's a big opportunity. I think one of our audience members, I'll shout him out to it, Ben at Fresco. There's a huge opportunity once you have the control surface and the capability to like apply, precision in the kitchen. This kind of goes back to the user experience and giving people something that's valuable. It's like you can now map recipes and give people instructions that they can follow in a really clear way. And then you've essentially created replicability in the user experience, which means that in the past, like, yes, you could put a recipe on the screen on the stove, but if it actually lets you cook it correctly, that's a huge deal and a huge unlock.
Yeah, I think, again, the best XR food thing that I ever saw was for assuming that you don't have vision in one eye and giving you the information about what's hot or what's dangerous in that side of your body in this eye.
Jonathan, I think later on a panel we have the former CEO of Cana talking. He's more here to talk about personalized nutrition. But for those of you who don't remember, there's this product called Cana that was going to come out. The idea was, to me, it was the first big swing at additive manufacturing, even though it's a beverage, in a consumer product in the home. This idea of, hey, micro-manufacturing, making your beverage with a cartridge, any beverage. I'm excited about that. I think it's going to there's going to be a few big swings and misses probably in this space. But where do we see this idea of like, hey, the food printer sitting in your house can print food. Maybe it'll be beverages first, because that seems a little bit easier. You can kind of distill flavor molecules and beverages down to like a cartridge possibly. Where do we see this going, and when will it arrive?
I wish I knew the answer to this. I think it's not a question of technology. I think it's a question about perception. That's maybe why it might be easier. Usually, I think when you see a lot of these additive or 3D printing companies in the culinary space, a lot of them are working in typically confectionery goods, more sweets, like you see chocolate printers, you see cake decorators. But I think where it gets really interesting is when you can actually do savory, not just sweet. But again, I think of it a little bit as perception. So when you think about something that's food that's printed, it's not necessarily the most appetizing thing to think about. Honey, your print's ready, come and eat dinner. I don't know. So I think a little bit of it's the languaging and the marketing, the way it has to be kind of portrayed, but because food printing is not a new thing. Food printing is literally just deposition of ingredients. So it's been used in manufacturing for decades, especially in the food space, except it's been behind closed curtains more in the manufacturing space. So I think where it gets interesting is when you integrate software, which is I think what a lot of us are touching on. When you integrate software into the mix, you can get so much closer to customization in an actual kitchen appliance that people can use. And it's user-friendly, you can integrate XR and all these other sorts of user interfaces that you couldn't actually integrate before. So I think what will help food printing get into the kitchen, aside from the perception, is also the vertical markets that will have to kind of support it. So in the sense that if you had a food printer on the market right now, you can buy them for thousands of dollars. But what ingredients are you going to print with? where are you going to find your recipes from? You know, it's like kind of like we've created this iPod without music library, without an iTunes store, without ways to actually make music. So I think that's where it gets interesting. That'll be kind of the tipping point.
You think it's more a consumer application, or do you think food printing will happen more in the professional markets, the restaurants back of house?
I think it's going to start with restaurants back of house. Other applications like plant-based meats, which again is something that we didn't really anticipate when I first started my PhD. But companies like Redefine, other companies in this space too that are doing printing of fish. There's been a lot of press about other companies that are doing it. So I think it's finding its way into the alt meat market, which is really interesting because, which is actually a pretty good application because when you want to replicate actual muscle fibers in animal products, you can actually control every layer line. So you can control the muscle, the fat. I know it sounds super appetizing when I'm talking about this, but it's interesting. So I think that's kind of the first step, further removed from the actual customer, and then eventually, as the price point gets a little bit more acceptable, you go from ghost kitchens and then eventually into your home once you kind of build these supplementary markets.
Robin, we're talking about like these crazy ideas, and we've been in this probably longer than these other folks in terms of watching these crazy new kitchen gadgets come to market. There's been a lot of swings and misses. The graveyard is big for some of the. Talk a little bit about it. You guys are successful at this point. You're getting towards profitability, I would imagine. And what makes for a success? How can we take these big swings and experiment in the kitchen in a market where there has been some failure and capital is not always there from an investor standpoint?
Yeah, it's an incredibly difficult category because you're dealing with real physical things, and it's got to be appetizing. They got to want to buy it, and we're very lucky. We're profitably selling food now to tens of thousands of people every week, and serving them meals. And I would say bringing the most innovative kitchen robot in the world to American homes, and have been doing that now for 4 years. I think the trick for us was, like I said earlier, focusing on the consumer benefit first, and making sure that you're finding something, in our case, transitioning from storage to cooking automatically, that really helps people. But I think, frankly, if I was to give advice to all the startups in Eureka Park and everyone trying these things, is start small and focused and on something that can really improve a cook outcome, a culinary outcome, or save people time, and consumers will embrace that, right? I mean, my consumers, we just at CES launched something we called Suvie mix and match mode. And because Suvie has multiple zones and can control those zones, parents can eat one sous vide dish and the kids can have a different dish, and they can be ready and finished at the same time. Now, that might not seem like the most innovative robotic, knife chopping arm, but that is saving them time and fixing this problem of picky eaters in the household, right? And we just sold out on of our meals in mix and match from the first week we launched it. And so thinking about those consumer needs and then how you can bring smart technology and innovation to them will lead to success. And that's what's led to success for Suvie.
That arms akimbo, like robot impression you do reminds me of Molly. I think it was almost 10 years ago that Molly out of the UK won best of CES, and it's this crazy kitchen robot with a bunch of arms. And so they're still kind of moving along. But I'd love to hear, you or Sam's opinions on where you guys think cooking robotics and automation is going. I know that like Sony has a dedicated research group. They're working with universities. They are looking at accessibility and aging in place as a key driver for them. But they have some crazy cooking robots that they're working on. How much of this crazy cooking robots are going to come to fruition?
So I think the big thing that everyone's sleeping on is all the robotic stuff you've seen up to this point, until very, very recently, has been kind of manually coded and like in some sense like artisanal control systems and robotic stuff. So like if you see all the Boston Dynamics demos and stuff like that, that's like PhDs knowing how people walk and like translating that to a robot. The next generation of stuff is going to be way more accessible for way more teams to be able to execute because it's going to be driven by machine learning. And so there's going to be a wave of robotics companies kind of basically starting from right now, some of which maybe in the kitchen, that are going to be at much bigger scale than I think we've seen before. And that's also enabled by there's companies, especially in China, that are kind of commercializing a lot of the actuators that were developed, I think, originally in academia at MIT and other places. But there's going to be a library of actuators, and there's going to be a bunch of machine learning innovations that are going to basically be landing in the next couple of years in consumer robotics. It's gonna be super exciting. That's not necessarily a kitchen specific thing. That's going to be the broad where the market I think is heading right now.
What I'm seeing now in the market is two different directions, right? One is like the yokai, where it's a condensed, a lot of things happening in a small constrained space. It's not these crazy robotic arms like we saw with like Cafe X, but we all are seeing progress on humanoid robots. The Tesla robot, there's a few others that actually are pretty multifunction. That maybe, and a lot of the demos are doing, they're to illustrate their soft touch capabilities, is picking up eggs, for example, and cracking an egg. So I kind of see two directions. One is like very optimized, small space vending machines, a lot of robot automation happening in a constrained space behind closed doors. And then there's like the humanoid robot that's multifunction.
I'm going to make a prediction that actually movement of food will be the last innovation we see, because
Bingo.
I think when it actually comes to cleanability, food storage and safety, that unless you're in an incredibly defined and controlled environment like Cafe X, like Yokai, where it's very defined food product, that is the hardest thing to solve reliably in the home. And that what you're going to see is things like lasers and sensing that can maybe, achieve the similar result with relatively little moving of the food product. I mean, if you consider a solenoid a motor, then Suvie actually has I think 7 motors in it. There's a lot of ways to get to those outcomes without the challenge of cleanability and safety that those present, which are enormous. And you saw it with the self-driving cars guys, right? They've been at this for 15 years. They're kind of barely there. And because the safety of those edge cases are so hard to solve, and I think you're going to see the same thing. So in food, where you'll get amazing automations, but the actual articulated arms will be the last thing we see.
Sam, do you?
Yeah, so I think this is 100% correct. And what we're doing is like being able to set and hold accurate temperature, and then making sure that's like communicated to the user in a way where it's like they actually get a good experience out of it. Like your oil doesn't smoke when you're frying, for instance, would be you don't have to poke your fire alarm. Is kind of like simple experiences like that. Even though that requires a ton of automation to actually get right, are going to be. I think that's the first set of stuff to land, and then I think the revolution in robotics that's happening just because of AI right now and that applying to control systems, that's going to be landing, let's call it 2026 plus, in terms of like when we're going to start seeing stuff beyond like toy robot dogs and things like that with this technology. That's going to start landing then. And then at some point, once that's actually scaled, then, oh yeah, you're going to have a sous chef that is like a Tesla robot or something like that. But that's like, and that's more of like, and towards the end of the decade, but maybe a little earlier actually in some cases. Maybe starting to move boxes of frozen goods in the back in the fridge. That'll probably be first, and then it's maybe we'll start seeing shopping food later.
One of the thing about new cooking technologies and these new gadgets, et cetera, it forces you to kind of reimagine what the kitchen space could look like. And I mean, there's been like Electrolux and GE have both put out proof of concept ideas about, hey, here's a reimagined kitchen. Electrolux had a very modular concept called Grow. I think about 3 years ago at CES, GE Appliances had a kind of this sustainability-centric kitchen as you factor in sustainability. But I want to talk a little bit about maybe what the kitchen of the future looks like, not just the gadgets within it, but I'll put you on the spot, Jonathan. If we put new things like additive manufacturing in the kitchen, delivery becomes ever cheaper. Drones and underground delivery can bring food to us fast. Do we need a kitchen? What does a kitchen look like? Do we have new things in the kitchen? What does the space look like?
I think it depends what you mean by kitchen, but I think if we think of it, the kitchen as the place where food is being made, then we'll have somewhat like I picture an assembly line sort of thing, right? Where we touched on earlier how more of these, just looking at heating technologies, we're starting to integrate more with each other, which allows us to get different types of modalities of cooking and do more with more versatile types of cooking in the same unit box. I think you're going to start to see that incorporate with the smart fridge concept we kind of touched on earlier, where you don't even need to take things out of the fridge. You don't even need to know if the milk's going to go bad. It's going to get ordered for you. It's like, it's a no-brainer to me that you're going to start to have, vision sensing systems inside your fridge, or even if you want to call it a fridge, but just like your cooling box and your heating box. Right? When you want to store your food, you're going to have it set. And then at a certain point when you want to eat, it'll start to have more predictive behavior. I think another limiting factor, which I was thinking about when Sam was talking earlier, was I think one of the limitations right now of some of the cooking appliances we have is they're all open loop. So there's no sensing, right? It's like cooking with your eyes shut, which you can't do if you've ever tried to do it before. So I think that's one of the limitations, which is why a lot of the robots you see have these coordinated motions, and it looks like it's very smart, but really it's just an engineer in the background pre-coding everything that's actually going to happen. So I think you need to have vision, you need to have some sort of sensory feedback, which is what we do naturally as humans. So I think once you start to integrate that into the loop, into the cooking appliances, into the way your fridge can actually watch to see what food you have, when it's going to go bad, when it can order more food for you, you'll start to get a much smarter kitchen that can start to actually do more predictive behavior for you, can learn from you, like having a nutritionist that actually goes out to get food for you and all that sort of thing. So that's kind of what I see.
Robin, what do you think that future kitchen space looks like? You've probably seen the Electrolux proof of concept. Jonathan's talking about like almost a sensory thinking kitchen that's a little bit alive with like kind of human perception, not perception, but kind of can sense things. Where do you think this is going?
I mean, I totally agree with Jonathan. It has more inputs and all of those appliances, which I think frankly look a lot like our appliances today, because you can only sell ovens that are designed for one day of the year in the United States. And that's Thanksgiving, right? We're never going to be able to sell a lot of ovens that can't fit a turkey, right? And so the form factor looks probably quite similar, but more sensing with maybe more, accurate output, right? Being able to target that heat through lasers, through multiple cooking elements. I mean, think about the transformation of an LCD television and how there were more and more lights, right? To the point of OLED where it was 1-to-1 for every pixel, right? As we can approach those kinds of things on the heating matrix or whatever's delivering the heat, that can do it. AR, VR, I think bringing the recipe and cooking in is a huge part, but then also going upstream to the food packer, the producer, and getting better coordination with that product that's being sold in the grocery stores or shipped to the customer. We do so much engineering at Suvie behind the scenes to make sure that our chicken breasts are cut in a certain way, or our salmon fillets are, so that they cook very well in our device and they can fit in perfectly. And so this communication of food, talking to the appliance, and then frankly talking to the mobile phone is the last piece as the control interface. I think we see that all evolve, and it probably looks pretty similar to your standard 36-inch drop-in, slide-in range and your over-the-counter microwave that we see today.
All right, we have about 2 minutes left, so we're going to go speed round and just go down the line about what everyone is maybe most excited about. If we look on a 10 to 15-year time horizon, if you want to go 20 years, we can do that. So we'll start with Jonathan, come this way. What are you most excited about, Jonathan, when you think about the future of cooking in the kitchen?
I think predictive behavior in the kitchen really interests me the most, in the sense that I think as humans we're generally pretty. We have a set schedule. We have some kind of underlying pattern. We like certain sweets in the morning, certain maybe savory things later. So I think getting to a point where the chef or some sort of digital appliance in the kitchen can predict what I'm going to want to eat before I actually want to eat it, I think that for me would be really interesting to see.
Lauren.
I think like smart fridges and being able to use AI to reduce food waste by tracking what we're purchasing more.
That's great.
Yeah, so apart from us all losing all our jobs thanks to GLP-1 drugs, I think that there's I think this was mentioned earlier, I think there's going to be a huge innovation in prepared and frozen foods. Like frozen pizza has gotten dramatically better over the last couple of years, and I think that's a big testament to automation behind the scenes versus anything else. It's kind of like these things are invisible, and I do think that's actually going to be the narrative. It's like there's going to be this kind of invisible transformation of all of our appliances. They're not going to be dramatically different, but they're going to have kind of this like sleeper hit set of capabilities that are going to be really massive. And then also like there's the whole energy angle here that is like beyond just the kitchen. It's like what your stove is doing when it's off, or you think it's off, is I think another big piece that's a big deal.
I'm excited about families not spending time in the kitchen, being able to have delivered to them a nutritious, healthy meal that meets their personal dietary needs and desires, and getting to spend more time with their families and loved ones because all these cool kitchen appliances are doing a lot of the work for them.
Aw. That's a nice note to end on. So I think this has been a great conversation. I appreciate this variety of perspectives from folks who've been building this for so long and futurists are doing the research on what's coming next. And so I would encourage you in the audience, if you want to connect with these folks afterwards, they'll be walking off stage. You can ask them a few questions for the next 10 minutes or so. But give them a big round of applause. This has been great. Thank you, guys.